Marcus Hale was 34 years old, and most mornings began the same way. He pulled on a pair of yellow rubber gloves at the industrial sink of Bellamy's Growl in Caldwell, Ohio, and the water that hit the dishes was 15 degrees above regulation. The sink had run that hot for 3 years. Nobody had fixed it, because nobody with the authority to complain had ever noticed. He kept a checking account with $412 in it. His savings account had been dormant long enough that the bank had stopped sending statements. He drove a 2003 Chevy Malibu with a cracked dashboard and a passenger side window that no longer closed fully. In winter, he wedged a folded bath towel into the gap and drove anyway. He lived in a studio apartment on Delancey Street, in a part of Caldwell that had been losing residents for 40 years. The laundromat across the street was closed. The diner 2 blocks down was closed. The hardware store on the corner, which had operated since 1961, had a plywood board over its front window and a phone number written in red marker that nobody called anymore. Marcus had grown up in Caldwell. He had planned to leave. 6 days a week, 10 hours a shift, he washed dishes at a grill that served the county's remaining professional class: accountants, insurance adjusters, the occasional local politician who preferred to be seen dining somewhere with cloth napkins. Marcus never saw the dining room. He worked entirely in the back, between the bus tubs and the floor drain. His kitchen manager was a man named Gary, who had a habit of appearing silently behind Marcus during the dinner rush, watching him work without a word, and then leaving, also without a word. Gary addressed him only by his last name. Hale, table 9 sent back a glass, spots. Marcus would look at the glass, which was clean, and rewash it without comment. Hale, we're behind on the soup pots. Marcus would not point out that the line had been short-staffed since Tuesday, or that he had been absorbing the extra work without acknowledgement. Hale, corporate's coming Friday. I need everything spotless. He nodded because arguing was a cost he couldn't afford in a town where the alternatives were thin. He had learned, over years, to move through rooms without drawing attention. At family gatherings, at the occasional bar night with Pete from the kitchen, even on the phone with his mother in Cincinnati, there was a persistent sense of being slightly removed from whatever was happening, present but muffled. He ate lunch alone near the loading dock, usually from whatever prep scraps were available before they were discarded. He ate quickly because eating slowly made the silence too apparent. On the morning of October 14th, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number from an area code he didn't recognize. He was halfway through a stack of lunch plates with 3 hours until the dinner rush. He had learned through experience that unknown callers generally meant bad news or unexpected expenses. He answered anyway. The voice on the line was formal and measured. "Is this Marcus Allen Hale?" "Yeah," he said, "that's me." "Mr. Hale, my name is Robert Elias. I'm a probate attorney with Elias and Fontaine in Whitmore County. I've been attempting to reach you for several weeks regarding the estate of your great-uncle, Clarence Bernard Hale." Marcus went still. Clarence Hale had been a name spoken at the edges of family gatherings for as long as Marcus could remember. A relative who had left Ohio before Marcus was born, who had gone west, who had owned something somewhere, though nobody could say exactly what. His grandmother had mentioned him occasionally with an expression that suggested restrained opinion. His mother had described him once with finality as difficult, which in their family meant someone who refused to perform contentment on cue. "I didn't know he died," he said.
3 months ago, we had difficulty locating your contact information. You appear to be the sole surviving heir to his estate." Marcus leaned against the cinder block wall. Steam from the dishwasher rose around him. "What did he have?" he said. There was a pause, professional, brief, and then Elias told him something he had to ask to be repeated. "He owned a mine, Mr. Hale. A silver mine in Harlan County, Nevada. You've just inherited it." Somewhere in the dining room, a glass broke. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He drove the Malibu as far as Denver before the transmission produced a sound that made him pull over and assess his options honestly. He took a Greyhound the rest of the way to Whitmore County, arriving at 9 in the morning into a town called Elko Basin that appeared to have been built for a population of 10,000 and now held perhaps 800. Robert Elias's office was above a notary shop on Main Street. Elias was a compact man in his 60s, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who has delivered complicated news across a desk many times and learned not to accompany it with unnecessary feeling. He opened a manila folder and summarized the situation without embellishment. Clarence had purchased the Hale mine. It had carried that name before his acquisition, a coincidence Elias noted without dwelling on, in 1987 for $14,000. The mine had been non-operational since 1964. It had been closed as a working silver operation. Clarence had made several attempts to revive it over the following decades. All had failed. He had spent more on the property than it had ever returned. "So what am I inheriting exactly?" Marcus asked.
42 acres in Harlan County, the mine entrance, a collapsed secondary shaft, a storage structure in poor condition, and the water rights associated with the property. Elias paused. The mine flooded in the early 90s, a combination of groundwater infiltration and a failed pump system. The lower chambers are fully submerged. The access shaft is partially submerged. Marcus absorbed this. "I've inherited an underground lake," he said. "Essentially," Elias said, and the expression that crossed his face may have been the beginning of a smile. He handed Marcus a set of old iron keys, a manila envelope of documents, and a hand-drawn map that Clarence had apparently made himself, annotated in cramped, angular handwriting that suggested a man who had spent long stretches of time without much company. There was also a sealed letter with Marcus's name written on the front in that same hand. He didn't open it in the office. He wasn't ready to, and he didn't examine that feeling too closely. He rented a truck from a place in town and drove 40 minutes on a road that ended its pavement after the first 20 miles. The landscape shifted as he went, the high Nevada desert opening around him, pale and wide, thrumming with a silence dense enough to feel physical. Sage stretched in every direction, red rock outcroppings worn smooth by decades of uninterrupted wind, a sky the color of sun-bleached denim. He found the property by its gate, a rusted iron frame hung with a chain and a padlock. Beyond it, a dirt track led to a low hill, and at the base of that hill, partially obscured by years of encroaching brush, was a small wooden structure with a corrugated metal roof. Beside it, almost invisible at first approach, was the mine entrance, a rectangular opening cut into the hillside, framed with timber that had gone gray and silver with age. Marcus stood at the gate for a time. Then he used one of the iron keys to open the padlock and walked in.
The shed held the organized remnants of someone's long effort. Tools hung on the walls in arrangements that had once been deliberate. A workbench ran the length of one wall, its surface covered with decades of accumulated material, rusted hardware, a cracked lantern, coffee cans filled with miscellany. A steel filing cabinet stood against the far wall. A calendar on the wall had been left open to March 1994, its daily notations legible if he leaned close. Pump check, call Ray, pump failed. The pump had failed in March 1994, and no one had returned to fix it. He opened a letter from Clarence there, standing in the shed with desert light coming through the single dirty window. "Marcus, I don't know if you'll come. I don't know if you'll bother. Your grandmother thought I was a fool, and maybe she was right. And maybe you've inherited that opinion, along with everything else. But if you're reading this, you came. So maybe you're more like me than anyone wanted. I'm not going to pretend the mine is worth much. It's not. The silver played out in the 40s, and nobody told the man who owned it until he'd run it another 20 years anyway. By the time I bought it, there was nothing left to find, at least nothing obvious. But Marcus, I want you to know something. The mine is not empty. I don't mean silver. I mean something else. Something I found in the lower chambers, before the water came. I tried to tell people. Nobody listened. By the time I had evidence, the water had taken it. I made a map. Not the one the lawyer has. Another one. It's there. You'll find it when you're ready. Don't let them push you out. They'll try. They always try. Your Uncle Clarence. He read it twice. Then he folded it back into the envelope and walked toward the mine entrance.
The timber framing at the entrance was old but solid. The dry desert air had done what wet climates could not. He had bought a flashlight at a gas station in Elko Basin. He switched it on and stepped inside. The temperature dropped within a few feet of the entrance. The floor of the access tunnel was packed dirt, sloping gently downward. The walls alternated between raw rock and timber supports installed at intervals. Marcus ran his hand along the rock as he walked, cool and rough and more substantial somehow than anything he had touched in a long time. He had walked perhaps 50 feet when the flashlight found the water. It filled the tunnel completely from wall to wall, absolutely still, its surface so flat and dark it registered at first as floor rather than liquid. He crouched to the edge and pointed the beam downward. The light scattered almost immediately against suspended sediment and mineral content. He could not see the bottom. He could not see past the first 2 feet of depth. He put his hand in and felt the cold, not surface cold, but the cold of water that had not seen daylight in 3 decades. He stood and shone the flashlight across the surface. That was when he noticed the wall to his left, 30 feet away across the water, just above the waterline. Letters, scratched into the stone, cut deep enough to survive years of water and darkness. He couldn't read them from where he stood. The water was between him and them, and he had no way across. But they were there.
He returned to the shed and opened the filing cabinet. Clarence had organized his files by year: tax documents, property assessments, water rights filings, correspondence with the Nevada Department of Mines, equipment receipts, maintenance logs. Marcus went through them methodically. In the 1987 file, he found the original purchase agreement, $14,000, to a man named Doyle Reddick, private sale, no broker. The property survey confirmed the 42 acres. There was also a brief letter from Reddick, written in an unsteady hand. "Mr. Hale, I hope you find what you're looking for. Don't go too deep in the east tunnel without proper light. Doyle." Marcus checked the hand-drawn map the attorney had given him. There was no east tunnel on it, only the main access shaft and the collapsed secondary, marked with an X. He continued through the files. In the 1991 folder, between 2 equipment receipts, he found a photograph, black and white, water damaged at one corner but otherwise clear. 3 men standing in a mine tunnel, the one in the center holding a lantern. All 3 were grinning. On the back, in Clarence's handwriting, "East Chamber, June 1991. We found it. RCGHCBH." He turned the photograph over and studied the 3 faces. CBH was Clarence Bernard Hale. The other 2 initials belonged to men Marcus didn't know. He looked at the man on the right for a long time. There was something in his posture, the angle of his chin, the particular way he held his weight, that felt familiar in a way Marcus couldn't locate. He put the photograph in his jacket pocket with the letter and kept working. He had been at it for another 20 minutes when he noticed the gap. The 1992 file was missing. Not misfiled, not damaged, simply gone. The 1991 file was present, the 1993 file was present, and between them was an empty space in the drawer, along with a faint rectangular outline on the cabinet floor where a file had rested for years before being removed.
Someone had taken the 1992 file. At some point, someone had been inside the shed and removed it. The question of who and when and why that year specifically did not have an obvious answer. He locked the shed and drove back to Elko Basin. He lay on the motel bed with the letter and the photograph on the nightstand and thought about Doyle Reddick's instruction: don't go too deep without proper light. He thought about what Clarence and 2 other men had found in the East Chamber in June of 1991, and what they had done about it, and what had happened in 1992 that somebody didn't want him to read. He was eating breakfast at Marisol's diner 2 days later when the man sat down across from him without invitation. He was perhaps 50, dressed in clothes that projected casualness without achieving it, the fit of the shirt too deliberate, the watch too understated in its expense. His hair was silver at the temples. His hands, resting on the table, were the hands of someone for whom physical labor was a distant memory. "Marcus Hale," he said, not a question. Marcus set down his fork. "My name is Dean Carver," the man said. "I represent a group of investors with interests in Harlan County. We've been aware of the Hale property for some time." "You approached my great-uncle," Marcus said. "3 times. He wasn't interested in selling." Carver tilted his head slightly. "I'm hoping you'll be more open to a conversation." "I've owned the property for 48 hours, Marcus said. "I'm aware. I wanted to reach you before you spend too much time out there. The property has real liabilities, no utilities, no adequate road access, a mine that's a remediation problem rather than an asset." He reached inside his jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This is a preliminary offer. I think you'll find it reasonable." Marcus looked at the envelope without touching it. "What does an investment group want with a flooded mine?" he said.
The land has value beyond the mine structure. Water rights, primarily. In this part of Nevada, water rights are worth considerably more than silver has been for decades. Carver held his expression steady. "We can move quickly. Cash transaction, no contingencies. I'll think about it, Marcus said. Carver nodded once, stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet with a number at the bottom, $85,000. He set it on the table beside his coffee cup and looked at it. $85,000 was more money than he had accumulated in his adult life. It was enough to eliminate the debt that had been building behind him for years, enough to buy a serviceable car, enough to leave Bellamy's Grill permanently. He thought about Clarence's letter. Don't let them push you out. They'll try. They always try. He thought about the 1992 file and whoever had removed it. He thought about the letters on the wall above the waterline, 30 feet across water he had no way to cross. He put the offer letter back in the envelope and left it on the table. He drove back to the mine. He found Vance Subsurface Operations out of Reno after 2 days of calls to dive companies, most of which cited liability concerns about private non-commercial mine work. The company was run by a woman named Anya Vance, who had 16 years of commercial and private underwater survey experience. When Marcus explained what he was dealing with, she said she had done stranger jobs and asked when he wanted them there. She arrived with 2 other divers, Theo, who was precise and quiet, and Simone, who had the focused calm of someone accustomed to working in hazardous conditions. Along with a van of equipment, Marcus watched them unload without being able to name most of it. Waterproof camera housings, cable lights, communication equipment, anchoring systems. Anya walked to the access hull, crouched at the water's edge, and studied the letters on the far wall.
There's a reference in the property documents to a secondary east tunnel, Marcus told her. It's not on the official survey. She nodded. If there's a secondary tunnel below the waterline, the flood pattern would show it. We might be able to detect current differentials. She looked at the water. It's gonna be cold. The rigging took 2 hours. Marcus sat at the tunnel entrance and went through Clarence's files while he waited. In a maintenance log from September 1991, 3 months after the photograph, he found a short entry. Pump running heavy. GH says the pressure is wrong. We think there's a subsurface connection we didn't account for. RC took samples to Reno last week, still waiting. GH and RC again, the same initials as the photograph. Anya surfaced at the edge of the water and pulled out her regulator. Come to the edge, she said. He came. She pointed her dive light downward and angled it, and Marcus could see that the water close to the wall was clearer than he had expected, some current moving through it, disrupting the sediment suspension. There's a secondary tunnel, she said, east-facing, about 30 feet down. Clear, no collapse, no blockage. The timbering inside is maintained, not recently, but not decades ago either. She paused. And there's a chamber, maybe 40 feet across. Someone used it for storage. Shelving systems still structurally sound. And on the shelves, sealed wooden crates, dozens of them. How many? Marcus asked. Theo is still counting, but the wood is wrong. Wrong how? Old, she said carefully. Not mine timber old. The joinery is different. The hardware is different. Whatever was used to build those crates was not built for a 1990s silver mining operation.
She reached into her dive bag and removed a waterproof evidence bag. Inside it was a fragment of metal, small, irregular, the color of oxidized copper. She handed it to him, and he carried it to the tunnel entrance, where the desert light came in. The fragment bore a stamped image, a stylized bird with raised wings, surrounded by lettering in a script he did not recognize. The letters were not English or Spanish. They appeared to have been pressed into the metal by a method and with a precision that had nothing to do with any of the surrounding landscape's industrial history. His phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Hale, my client has authorized an increase to the offer. Please call at your earliest convenience. Time is a factor. He read it twice, then put the phone in his pocket. That night, he called his mother. He had not spoken to her since leaving Caldwell. She listened to a brief summary of what he had found, and then she said something she had apparently never considered worth mentioning before. Did you know your grandmother and Clarence didn't speak for 30 years? She never told me exactly why, only that he had found something he shouldn't have found, and she didn't want any part of what came after it. Marcus asked her if she still had Clarence's letters. His grandmother had kept them all, she said, every one he had ever sent. She had found them after his grandmother passed and had never read through all of them. He asked her to find the box.
3 days later, on a Thursday morning at Marisol's, she called back and read him a passage from a letter dated April 1992, the year of the missing file. Edna, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I know what you think of all this, but I have to tell someone who shares the blood. We found chambers below the east shaft that have no business being there. I had an archaeologist here last month, man named Guthrie, retired from UNR, solid man, and he said what we found suggests pre-Columbian habitation, possibly significant. I think the Basque miners who worked this land in the 1880s found it first and sealed it up, maybe because they were afraid of what their bosses would do with it. I'm filing claims. RC is helping with the paperwork. But Edna, people are already asking questions. A company out of Reno has been calling. Please keep this to yourself. Pre-Columbian habitation. Marcus set his coffee cup down carefully. He called Dr. Sarah Kamani at the University of Nevada, Reno, an associate professor of indigenous archaeology in her 30s, who, after 3 specific questions and a request for photographs of the coin fragment, called him back within an hour. The markings on that fragment are consistent with Great Basin indigenous craft traditions documented from approximately 800 CE through the 15th century, she said. The specific bird motif has been found at 3 archaeological sites in Nevada and 1 in Utah. If there is a sealed chamber containing pre-contact materials in that mine, it would represent one of the most significant archaeological finds in the recorded history of the American West. She asked about the letters on the wall. He described what he had been able to see from a distance. Cramped lettering, not English, possibly Basque. The Basque miners would have found the chamber, she said, before he finished the description. They had a cultural framework for what they called leku sacratua, sacred place, that would have made deliberate desecration unthinkable. They would have sealed it, and they would have marked what they did. She told him she needed to come to Nevada.
He told her he was working on lowering the water level first. "I'll be there in 2 days," she said. He spent an afternoon on the phone with a water rights attorney in Reno, a referral from Elias's office, who confirmed, with the careful qualification of someone managing institutional exposure, that Marcus had the legal authority to pump the water from the property, provided the operation did not disturb adjacent water tables. If it was related to a potential archaeological find, there were federal statutes that would apply, and things could become complicated. That evening, Marcus sent Dean Carver a text. "Still thinking about it." The response came back in under 2 minutes. "Take your time. We'll be here." The speed of it was more informative than the words. Carver's group was not waiting. They were watching. They had known about the property before Marcus arrived, which meant they had known while Clarence was alive. Clarence's letter had not been the product of an isolated man's anxiety. He went back through the filing cabinet more carefully that evening. At the back of the 1993 drawer, taped to the rear wall of the cabinet in a way that would be missed by anyone not looking for it, was an envelope. Inside was a second map, hand-drawn on drafting paper, detailed and precise. It showed the mine in cross-section, the access tunnel, the east tunnel, the chamber Anya's team had found, and below that chamber, connected by a narrow passage not recorded on any official document, a second chamber, larger. In the second chamber, Clarence had written 2 words in red ink, "Still sealed." The pumps ran for 11 days. Marcus stayed at the mine for most of it, sleeping in the truck, eating from a cooler, watching the water level in the access tunnel drop by increments as the equipment ran. Dr. Kamani arrived on the second day, walked the tunnel, examined the letters on the wall from the closest distance the water level permitted, and said nothing for a long time. On the 4th day, Carver appeared at the gate with 2 other men. "The offer has gone up again," he said. "My clients are prepared to go to $340,000. Marcus stood on the other side of the gate. "Why does it keep going up?" he said. "Water rights in this county are appreciating. There's agricultural development in the region." "I know about the chamber," Marcus said. Carver's expression held. The adjustment behind it was small but visible, a recalibration. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "I think you do," Marcus said, "and I think your clients have known about it for longer than I have." He walked back toward the mine entrance. Carver called after him, something about easements and regulatory exposure, but Marcus didn't turn around, and after a time the voice stopped. On the 7th day, the water dropped enough to expose the letters on the wall. Kamani went in with her flashlight and stood before them for several minutes. Marcus stood behind her. The inscription was in Basque. She read it aloud, her voice dropping without apparent intention. "Here is what we found and left in peace. Let it stay in peace. Miquel Arizabalaga, 1887. She told him who Arizabalaga was, a Basque miner documented in the Nevada silver fields of the 1880s. His letters existed in the Basque archives in Boise. He had found the chamber, sealed it, and left his name in stone so that someone, at some point, would know. On the 11th day, Anya's team went in and reached the east chamber. Simone counted 47 sealed wooden crates on the intact shelving. The chamber walls were covered in ochre figures, animals, human forms, geometric patterns, stellar arrangements,
painted with a precision and internal consistency that would take years to fully analyze. The passage at the back of the chamber, leading downward toward the second chamber on Clarence's map, was still submerged.
Theo came out after 4 hours of video documentation and sat on the tunnel floor without speaking for a while. When Marcus asked him what he thought, he said Marcus should contact the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe and the Shoshone, the State Historic Preservation Office, and an attorney familiar with NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. He said Marcus should understand that what came next would take a very long time. Marcus sat down on the tunnel floor beside him. "Somebody put something very important somewhere very safe," Theo said, and trusted the earth to hold it. It did, for a long time. What happens now depends on what you decide you want to be part of. Marcus retained a Reno attorney named Petra Solis, who had spent 15 years working on land rights cases involving indigenous tribes and repatriation claims. He told her everything. She listened for an hour without interrupting. "You own the land," she said when he finished. "You do not own the cultural contents of those chambers. Under NAGPRA, if human remains or objects of cultural patrimony are present, which appears likely, the affiliated tribes have standing and the right to consultation before any access or removal. You cannot open those crates unilaterally." "I know," Marcus said. "I don't want to." She held his gaze for a moment. "Then we file a temporary restraining order against unauthorized property access, establish you as a cooperating landowner in all federal and tribal consultation processes, and let the legal framework work." "How long does that take?" "Years, possibly more than a few." "And Carver's group?"
They don't stop because you say no. They find adjacent angles, water rights challenges, regulatory complaints, easement claims. She paused. "This will be a sustained fight. Are you prepared for that?" He thought about Clarence, who had held this property alone for 36 years, without anyone listening. "Yes," he said. Carver's investors filed a complaint with the Nevada Department of Water Resources in December, alleging that Marcus's pump operation had damaged a protected aquifer. The complaint was dismissed in February, but the legal costs ran to $8,000. Marcus sold the Malibu, bought a 2009 Ford pickup for $4,000, and continued. In January, the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe and the Elko band of the Timok Shoshone filed formal statements of cultural affiliation with the Federal Register. Dr. Kimani's preliminary report was published in a University of Nevada journal and began drawing attention from institutions across the country. Marcus maintained strict control over public information, on Petra's advice. Carver's group was not the only party that would have interests in what the mine contained. In March, Carver submitted a written offer of $1.2 million. Marcus read it in the same booth at Marisol's where Carver had first sat across from him 6 months earlier. He considered the offer carefully and honestly. He did not underestimate what it represented, or pretend that the months since October had been easy. Then he wrote back, "Not for sale." The escalation that followed was methodical. A shell company made an attempt to purchase the 40 adjacent acres, a move designed to restrict site access that Petra identified before it completed. An assemblyman's office called to suggest that the regulatory obligations of maintaining a site of this nature might represent an undue burden for a private landowner. In April, a letter arrived from an attorney Marcus did not recognize, asserting that a previously unidentified cousin of Clarence Hale had standing to contest the estate. Petra traced the claim within 3 weeks. The cousin's name was Dale. He lived in Phoenix and taught high school history. He had been approached by an intermediary connected to Carver's investment group and offered $30,000 to file a probate challenge. He had declined and called Petra's office instead.
Kimani's working assessment, which she presented at a conference in San Francisco, and which Marcus watched via live stream from his room above Dolores's kitchen, was that the archive had been assembled and sealed sometime in the 14th century. The most plausible interpretation was that it had been created by a community facing a period of significant disruption, drought, conflict, migration, who had placed a record of their knowledge in the earth with the expectation that someone would return for it. No one had returned. A Basque miner had found it in 1887 and made a decision about it. A man from Ohio had purchased the land for $14,000 in 1987 and spent the following 36 years holding it without fully knowing what he was holding. And a phone call that very nearly went unanswered had set in motion what came next. The agreement transferring custodial rights to the cultural contents of both chambers took another year to finalize. The Joint Tribal Council, representing the affiliated nations, received full authority over interpretation, access decisions, and repatriation processes. Marcus retained the 42 acres, the mine structures, and the water rights. Carver made one final approach in the parking lot of Marisol's on a gray November morning. He was without the practiced composure this time. He looked like a man who had expected a different outcome for a long time and was only now adjusting to the one he had. "You could have been comfortable," he said. "I'm okay," Marcus said. "You walked away from over $1 million. "I know what I walked away from," Marcus said. Carver studied him briefly. "What are you going to do with the land?" "I'm working on it," Marcus said.
In May, the State Historic Preservation Office conducted its formal survey of the accessible chambers. The lead surveyor, a man named Hargreaves with 20 years of field experience, stopped beside Marcus on his way out on the final day of the survey. "I've never seen anything like what's in that chamber," he said. "The paintings alone. Whoever sealed it understood what they were protecting. The environmental conditions in there are as close to ideal as I've documented." "Mikil Aritzabalaga," Marcus said. "And the people who put it there originally," Hargreaves said. "They chose the location well." The formal entry into the second chamber, entry was a more accurate word than opening, took 14 months to reach. 14 months of legal filings, tribal consultation processes, federal oversight protocols, survey reports, and preliminary assessments. Marcus lived in Elko Basin throughout, working at a hardware store that had recently reopened, renting a room above a woman named Dolores, who left tamales outside his door on Sundays without mention. He spoke to his mother twice a week, and with increasing frequency, to Dale in Phoenix, a quiet, considered man who had turned out to share more with Marcus than an interrupted legal claim. The entry was conducted by a team of tribal representatives and federal archaeologists and preservation specialists, with Dr. Kamani present throughout. Marcus stood at the perimeter. It took 3 days to document the contents. The second chamber was an archive. Not a burial site, there were no human remains. An organized, deliberately assembled archive. Ceramic vessels sealed with pine resin, woven baskets in near perfect condition, tools, garments, preserved by the sealed, dry conditions of the chamber, carved objects in stone and bone, and woven and knotted records, a form of structured information storage that the specialists would spend years interpreting and that had no direct parallel in the documented material culture of the region.
Before the summer ended, he wrote a letter to Mikil Aritzabalaga. He understood that this was not a rational act. He wrote it by hand, on paper, and left it in the shed alongside Clarence's tools and files, and the calendar still turned to March 1994. The letter said, "We found it. We are leaving it in peace. Thank you for your name on the wall." He sealed the envelope. He did not mail it. The Hale Mine Cultural Preservation Site in Harlan County, Nevada, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The archive's contents continue to be studied in active partnership with the affiliated tribal nations. Dean Carver's investment group withdrew from Harlan County in 2026. Petra Solis remains Marcus Hale's attorney. Marcus Hale still lives on the property. The second chamber has not been fully cataloged. There is more down there. No one yet knows how much.
He was. The water rights, handled through an arrangement Petra structured with an agricultural cooperative, generated a modest but consistent leased income, not a substantial sum, but sufficient and stable. Marcus used it to build a small research facility at the surface of the site, 3 rooms, a covered work area, utilities, a paved access road, and a small attached residence for visiting researchers. He was present when the first group of tribal scholars arrived to begin the interpretive work, and he stood at a distance and watched them walk into the mine. He called his mother that afternoon from the property. "Clarence would have liked this," she said when he described the scene. "I think so," he said. "Are you coming home?" He looked out at the 42 acres, at the hillside, at the small facility with its tribal council flag flying beside the Nevada state flag in a steady wind from the southwest. "This is home," he said. He stayed. He learned the names of the affiliated tribes and the broad outlines of their documented history. He drove Dr. Kamani to and from the airport more times than either of them tracked, and they talked for hours in the truck about what the archive represented, about the human practice of preserving knowledge for people you will never meet, and the particular combination of circumstances required for that preservation to succeed. He hired a woman named Rosa to manage the facility's administrative operations. He brought Dale out for a week in the summer. Dale stood in the tunnel entrance for a long time without speaking, and then said, "Uncle Clarence was something else." "Yeah," Marcus said.